Do you think there's a way that people can engage with Native American motifs and like symbols and culture without appropriating it? Do they have to understand it thoroughly, or are there any other conditions?
I think people can definitely. I really encourage people to visit the reservations nearest to them. I think that's the biggest way you can start. See the conditions we're living in. See how we grow up. See how hard it is for us, and then also see how the beauty in it as well. Because a lot of our land is beautiful, it's pure, untouched, and then a lot of our Native American people who make jewelry or clothing, you can go there. And another big thing for Navajo people is we make a lot of rugs, Navajo rugs, and people love our rugs and our rug designs.
I think I've seen them before.
Yeah, and so it's just about going to those communities, hearing them out, understanding. I think people will really appreciate it. And then even buying. I know there's a lot of celebrities that are reaching out to Native American communities. Mark Ruffalo's a really big one. He really supports Native American and Indigenous ideologies. Bernie Sanders is a huge advocate for Native American communities. I've also seen, I think her name is Jada Pickett Smith. Yeah. She also collaborated with Bethany Yellowtail. She runs her own Native American clothing company, and so she was buying and supporting and showing. Miley Cyrus and the Cyrus family, I know they've done a lot with Bethany Yellowtail as well, and to show support and bought a lot of her clothing. And it's just things like that. It's like if you buy from Native-owned companies, I guarantee you that there will be meaning and purpose, and you'll have understanding of where those products come from. And so I think it's very possible for non-Native communities to engage with us and show support that way. Yeah, it's just about understanding the Native people in your community. The more representation we have, the more people look into our cultures, then I think.
You're not seeing the culture as like something to consume, but like a people, like it represents a people and the history.
Yeah.
I see.
So you were talking about the way, like the Redskin, the team, what was it? Football team or?
It's a football team.
Yeah, football team. So, and I was wondering, like, about the Redskin. It's a bit, what do you call it? Rude to you, right?
Yeah.
Offensive.
Yeah.
And what kind of other offenses have you ever experienced in your life?
Redskins. I've heard people say prairie and then the N-word. I've heard people say drunks, alcoholics. We have that negative connotation as well. There's several, but those are pretty much the ones that come to my mind that I've heard.
Sorry.
No. I think it just comes from just that lack of understanding. People just don't understand Native communities and our struggles, and that kind of ignorance leads to different things too. So, yeah, I just think people need to pay a little bit more attention.
Yeah. There are always groups of people who are like, yeah, we just need to bully someone.
Yeah.
Actually, minorities bully them. Like in between minorities, they also bully themselves. Because I was thinking about what kind of offenses have I heard in my life, and there are plenty of. But also, I've heard some people from my own, like ethnic minority from our community, bullying other people from other minorities.
Yeah.
So like, some of my relatives were like, "Oh, those blah blah blahs, those Uzbeks and everything," and then like, why? We are Koreans, of course. We're in Kazakhstan, but come on, let's not be like acidic to other people inside our country. But yeah, I think that's not only about the understanding, it's just about we want to bully someone. It's in our nature.
Pass on the pain.
Yeah. Just okay. They call us like whatever Chinese. We call some other Uzbeks like trash and everything.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really prevalent issue in Navajo community and society as well, because we do have a lot of multiracial individuals a part of our tribe, so they do get the tail end of that as well from native Navajo, like people who are originally Navajo, full-blooded Navajo born. They'll do a lot of bullying towards those individuals. I've seen that in my community, and so that means I don't know. Sometimes I'm like, oof, why do you guys have to do that? I don't understand, but that's something that a lot of Native people are talking about now too, just respecting everyone in general.
Yeah. So it's so confusing to me because people sometimes think that ending racism and ending whatever problems you have is applying these exact problems to other people. So like you're applying racism to other people, and then you don't get it. Like I don't know. Yeah. We'll have to cut the word out. Actually, I think. Oh. Will we?
Which one?
Yeah, I saw many YouTubers cut the word racism out because of demonetization.
But we're not monetized.
Yeah, so
we have nothing to lose.
Let's talk about everything.
That's why my article can't be.
That's something we've run into. We've started renaming our articles in gentler ways because her article was shut down. Charity's article was shut down. Our podcast, we were allowed to promote our podcast, which is why all of our things on like Instagram have like maybe 20 likes, and then our podcast got 200 plus.
Really?
On Instagram, because we were allowed to promote it because we were like, we titled it "Talking to a Tibetan Exile," and we kind of, she didn't want to be political, obviously, because China is still very present with the Tibetan population, there were keywords weren't chosen by YouTube to remove it. So
okay.
But we can, we would like to.
Yeah.
Just silently block out. Yeah. So besides monetization issues and blocks on things.
Yeah, that's okay. We don't monetize, so yeah.
Yeah.
We're not. I don't think we're allowed to monetize right now. We're too small of a channel.
I don't really care. So yeah, back to the point. I was thinking like tribal communities, like your tribal community, obviously like Native Americans, and our tribal community previously, like Kazakh community was tribes also. Like we were constitution like nomads switching places, you know, and so there are a lot of similarities. Like especially you address your generations. Like past generations, and we do it too. We give like horses as gifts. You do it too, and everything. So it's so similar.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, like, do you feel like a tribe community is so much more like unique and it should be preserved?
Because I grew up that way. Yes, I would really support it, but I don't think it's something that a lot of other communities would understand unless you grew up that way. But for me, I think a tribal system, it works really well for us. But I do know that it's probably different for every different tribe, because I know every different tribe had it differently. Every other tribe, experienced the colonization in a different way. And then, so for like my tribe, we were very fortunate enough to get much of the original lands that we had back. Our reservation is the largest reservation, as I said. So, and we still have a lot of language speakers, native speakers. And so we've been very fortunate. And I know it's a totally different story for other tribes. Mm-hmm. So I think it just depends on, how impacted the tribes are. But I do think that tribal ideologies should be considered to help, especially because, like, for example, one of the different tribal ideologies, tribes are also associated a lot with climate issues, just because we've had a firm understanding of that, like, long before. We've always been a society where we respected nature. And so that's some of the issues that probably should be considered in governments and governing styles. So, yeah.
So I have a question. So, like, in Canada, there are funds by the government, and there is funding for people who are Native in Canada to, like, go to university and have their tuition paid and, like, to have these sort of programs to, I think, one, like, they're trying to compensate for everything that they've done, and then two, they're also trying to create opportunity for them to go, I guess, off their reserves. So, like, is there anything in America like that for you? Like, are there programs like for your university tuition to be compensated, or like living expenses?
Yeah, well, actually, the home university I go to, it's Fort Lewis College in Durango, Colorado. They actually give free tuition to all Native Americans. So I don't pay tuition, but there are also multiple scholarships available for Native people. There are also, I think there's a lot of funding available, but in that itself, sometimes the funding that we do get from the federal government is just not enough to compensate for all the issues that we do face. Like on my reservation, through the COVID-19 pandemic, one of the most prevailing issues that we found on our reservation is that we just don't have basic necessities that should be given. Like 30% of our entire population do not have electricity, do not have running water, living in third world conditions. And this is all happening in America that's supposedly supposed to be one of the most economically sufficient countries in the world. But you have these communities who are living like that. And so it's because the United States government just didn't live up to their treaty obligations, and we don't get the amount of funding that we should be getting. And then in that, even with the issue of trying to get us off our reservations, that can probably be seen also as a bad thing, because that means you're trying to take us away from our communities and assimilate us into a different society. And that was actually one of the things that the United States government actually pursued in our history. They encouraged to move a lot of Native people off of their reservations just to get them to assimilate. And so that's why you have a lot of Native populations who grew up in metropolitan areas too as well. And they just kind of forgot their language and their cultures, and now they're struggling to come back home and relearn it. So yeah, and then they've also done things such as taking away Native youth, Native children, and putting them up for adoption for white families to try to assimilate them through that. And so that's how you'll find a lot of Native people who were adopted and don't know anything about their culture and their language or their people, but they are Navajo. Like, I know an individual, she's actually a clothing designer. She runs Orenda Tribe. You guys should look at that. It's a really cool company. But she was adopted and she grew up off the reservation, and now she's coming home and trying to help her people. She was a big help during the pandemic. Just because our community got really hit hard, she came home and she helped us. So it's just stories like that of like people trying to make us leave our reservations. Now more so through funding and scholarships, it's about get educated but come home, because we have a lot of issues to fix.
So you think what would you think is the best way to fix those issues? If people will be home and fixing them, or is it better if they are out and fixing them? Like, you think coming back to the reservation and living there is like the best path?
I think with that question, that's when you have to address the tribal issues, on a tribal government level, because from what I've heard, it's really hard to run Navajo businesses on the Navajo Nation.
Oh, yeah.
Because there's so many different, I think there's different standards and policies in place. So it's a lot harder to run a business on the reservation than it is to run it off the reservation. That's why you'll find a lot of Native companies are formulated off of the reservation. And a lot of the big businesses are in, like, I know, like for Orenda Tribe, for example, they're based in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Bethany Yellowtail, I think it's California is where she's located. So it's just those companies are trying to help from off the reservation. But I think in order to like truly improve Navajo economy, Navajo living in general, it has to start on the tribal government level as well. We need support, and we should get support from the U.S., but we also have to consider the fact that we have to make it easier for our people to thrive on the reservation. And right now, on tribal government levels, they're not really living up to the expectation, and they're not doing what they're supposed to. And that's why you'll get, I think right now, especially, Native youth are really paying attention to their governments, and especially our tribal governments. We want them to. Because of what we experience through the U.S. government, we don't want our governments to get corrupt or fail in any way. So we're paying a lot more attention to them, and I think in order for our tribe to thrive, it has to happen through our tribes as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you participate in the overall U.S. election?
Oh, yeah.
Like the one that's coming up?
Yeah.
Very imminent.
Yeah.
It's like, does your community go out and vote, or?
Yeah. Now we Native communities, I think we were among some of the last groups of people to be granted the right to vote. But since then, we've been paying a lot more attention. I think especially in this election, a lot of Natives are wanting to vote, especially because, it's kind of the question that a lot of our lands are being threatened right now. I think through the Trump administration, I know recently he tried to acquire some of our sacred land, the Bears Ears area in Arizona, or Utah, I'm sorry. And he wanted to put oil companies there. And so our communities are just really threatened through this administration. So I think there's a lot of them are really trying to get out. In my state, Arizona, there's a large part of the reservation is on Arizona. So there's about 60 plus thousand Navajo voters available. And we mostly vote Democrat. But I think there have also been some Republican Navajos that have emerged and that are Trump supporters as well. So it's kind of getting a little divisive, but for the most part, I think majority of the tribal community is more liberal in that, because we understand that Democrats have more respect for our existence and have more respect for our lands as well. So there's a lot of participation going on right now, and I know I just casted my ballot yesterday, so
nice.
I'm excited.
We'll see what happens.
We'll see. I'm very nervous.
I don't know if I want to look on the day reveal, but
Did you vote?
Oh, yeah.
Of course
I voted. Of course.
Okay.
Yes.
So did you have to take it to the U.S. Embassy here, or did you do a mail-in?
I did a mail-in.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You can also even do online if you trust it.
Oh.
You should trust it.
Yeah. Another issue with Native voting too is just the fact that there's a lot of voter suppression when it comes to Native communities. I know that's an issue that a lot of Native people have been trying to get their people registered, and the problem with registering is some people live in such rural areas where there is no address. There is no street address for them, and sometimes I know up in, I think it was North Dakota, some of the tribes there was an issue that emerged that in order to vote, you had to have an ID with a valid address on it. And a lot of those communities don't have addresses because of how rural it is on the reservations. And so they lost their eligibility to vote. And so now that's just an issue that everybody's trying to address. And then even with the recent U.S. Census, a lot of Navajo community wasn't able to be counted. And we were granted we were supposed to have some more additional time to continue to complete the census, but I heard recently that they told us we couldn't. And so that's why a lot of Navajo people were disappointed, just because we weren't counted.
No, yeah, that's
Yeah,
definitely a
that's
reason to
awesome.
be
Yeah.
upset
Sure.
and angry, to live somewhere and then be like, oh, we're not going to count you actually.
Yeah.
Sorry.
You don't have an address, so you didn't give me one. Well, that's your problem.
Yeah, because I think 300,000 Navajo people are registered to the tribe through our certificate of Indian blood. So a lot of people are registered to be Navajo, but within census and all that data, there's only probably about 150 to 200,000 that were counted. Yeah, so that's a lot of people that were left uncounted.
Very
Interesting, the U.S. Political climate, they definitely talk about minorities these days, positively and negatively, but we don't really talk about Native Americans as often as we talk about, is this still going?
Yeah.
As often as we talk about African Americans. But do you think that trend is becoming better? Because I know some people were elected to Congress, I think.
Yeah, there was recently two women, Deb Haaland and Sharice Davis. They're the first two Native American women to be elected to Congress. So they're making progress. I'm sorry, what was your question?
No, it was just kind of in general. Just like, do you think their election will like help increase how people are talking, like the conversation about?
I think so. Yeah, I think it's especially because those two women are working a lot with the members of Congress and getting our issues heard on both sides of the aisle, and I think. That's why I mentioned Bernie Sanders a lot, and especially Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez too, because these are individuals who are really starting to speak on that national level about our issues and bringing light to those situations. And I think even with the Black Lives Matter movement, that really brought out a lot of indigenous support. So a lot of Native people were very upset with that mistreatment of those individuals. And so we go to a lot of those rallies and we show a lot of our support. And I know a lot of people who have been out there on the front lines with those Black Lives Matter movements. And so I don't think we see it as being not heard, but it's just about we want to be heard, but we know that a way to do that is by helping and supporting other minority populations. Yeah. But I think, I do think there's a lot more people becoming advocates for indigenous people, and so I wouldn't be surprised that within the next few years that more indigenous issues will be addressed, and I wouldn't be surprised because I know from my tribe, and I think Native American population in general, our populations are significantly growing. And so we're one of those fast-growing populations that people are starting to pay attention to. Okay. Yeah. Especially in, I think, Arizona and New Mexico, because we have a lot of tribes in those areas. And so if our tribes grow and our populations increase significantly, there's going to be a lot more attention on our communities because we're going to have we're going to be in a position to make changes. And we're going to have a lot more opportunity to speak, I think. Yeah.
Great.
I know in Canada a few years back there was a movement called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which worked in terms of bringing people to the table who were Canadian or who were immigrants, and then the Native populations from around Canada, and it traveled across from one end to the other. And it was supposed to be a place for everyone to speak and to learn about each other, and it was the first attempt, I guess, to apologize. And whether you like the current Prime Minister of Canada or not, he has now formally addressed issues of the past and made formal apologies, which is something that a Prime Minister in Canada has never done. Whether the British agreed with what Canada's actions are or not, he did it anyway. But the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, I attended one of the events out in Nova Scotia, and I found it very interesting. I was a lot younger when I went. Yeah. It was, I think, when I was still in actually, I don't want to age myself. It was when I was in middle school. So it was a long time ago. But okay. I remember that it was very interesting to actually get to talk with people who were my age but had this such a different life experience in Canada. Yeah. And for both of us to be Canadian and to just kind of listen to everything that they experienced versus what I experienced, because also I am from a visible minority, and just kind of similarities that we had in terms of racism that we faced and all these obstacles we faced, because some of us were brought into very white communities in Canada, and it was very in your face. But one of the most interesting things that I thought they did do, whether people approved of the attempt of the commission or not, was that there was different opportunities for people to experience things. They'd had a smudging ceremony, I remember that. And there was a lot of singing, which I thought was just beautiful. I'd never been introduced to that type of music before, and I just remember it being this really amazing experience. Has anything like that happened in America? Is there formal
level the federal government has made any effort to do that? But I think within our own communities and within like especially college communities, the Native presence is growing, and so there's a lot more people who are taking that initiative to share their cultures. And so maybe on like the college level and on a small scale, it is moving that direction, but there hasn't been any federal support for anything for reconciliation or those kinds of efforts.
In your universities, do you guys do, like, well, mostly for you, because I guess you're you're on the other side of America, if my geography is correct? No. I don't know geography.
The U.S. is huge, though, so, like, it can be different.
Do you, in your universities, do you have to do land acknowledgements? Because that was something that recently started in Canada, with universities being like, this lecture is taking place on these lands that were taken from these people, or the land that this library was built on is originally X land.
I've never heard, this is the first time I've heard of that. That sounds interesting.
So in Canada, in our universities, we now do land acknowledgements of where we're standing, or like where we're sitting in our lecture halls or the library. When we have guest speakers come in, we always open with, we are currently standing on the land originally called or originally owned by, like those types of things. So does that happen in your universities or like at presentations?
I've actually seen that more often now that you mentioned it, but I think it's, from the videos that I've seen, it's been a lot from, like Canada. But I don't know if I've seen that at my college campus specifically. They're really working on that. The indigenous population there is big because a lot of Native American students go there. So like one of the things, I think one of the big issues for us was that they acknowledged, they had a small memorial. It was really small that just like talked about the history of the school, being that it was a fort. Fort Lewis College was actually like a fort that was for Native American people. So a lot of Native American people, its history is that it was for Native American people, and like that was their first boarding. I think one of the boarding schools. It might be the boarding schools, or it was a fort where actual Navajo, not Navajo, but a lot of different Native peoples were kept there. But they had a small memorial, and that became an issue with a lot of the Native students there, because it was like, you have it so hidden, nobody sees it. And so now my college is addressing that issue. We have a new president for the school, so he's actually really open to the ideas, and so I think they're really making big moves to acknowledge. I think that's a growing trend. Yeah, I'm not sure if you've seen that.
I've never. So we've had some issues, but like, is there? But before we head off, is there anything like you want to express about Native community or?
I think, for the most part, I want to say thank you to you guys, because I think it's really awesome that a lot of people are wanting to hear about this and think that it's an interesting topic, and just that growing interest, it just needs to continue. I think we've touched a lot of the major issues that Native American people are facing today. That's just a few of the big issues, but it's a majority of the big issues. But I probably want to just say thank you, and I think you guys asked a lot of good questions, and yeah, I think we covered a lot of the things that we should have been covered.
Thank you for coming and talking with us.
So on behalf of NOVAsia, I just wanted to say thank you to Ian for spending so much time, and despite some of the technical difficulties we ran into today, he was very cooperative and very patient with us. So this will be up on our YouTube channel, and it will be split into 2 parts, I believe.
Yes.
So be sure to check the description for link to part 1 or part 2.
Subscribe, put likes, leave comments below.
And leave any comments below. We will have links to probably some designers or artists.
I can send you,
Sure, great.
Anything you wanted to include there.
Okay.
Thank you so much for taking the time to watch and listen to us today.
Bye.